The socket wrench slipped from Riley Blackwood's oil-stained fingers, clattering against the concrete floor of Castellano's auto shop with a sharp metallic ring that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. Above her, suspended beneath the chassis of a military Humvee, she froze as boots approached, heavy, deliberate, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Staff Sergeant Derek Morrison's voice cut through the humid Montana air like a blade. "I asked for your best mechanic, not some grease monkey playing dress-up. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." Riley Blackwood had learned to make herself invisible. At 28, with calloused hands and perpetually dirty fingernails, she blended seamlessly into the background of Pine Ridge's only automotive repair shop. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her coveralls hung loose enough to disguise the lean, athletic build that might have raised questions in a town where most people had never left Montana's borders. The military convoy had arrived at Castellano's just after dawn. 3 armored Humvees and a transport truck that had been making strange noises during their overnight stay at nearby Malmstrom Air Force Base. Vincent "Vinny" Castellano, the shop's 60-year-old owner, had been honored by the military's trust in his establishment. Pine Ridge was a small town of barely 3,000 people, and government contracts were rare enough to cause excitement throughout the community. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle," Staff Sergeant Morrison commanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. "We need someone qualified to handle military equipment." Riley slowly rolled out from under the Humvee on her creeper, taking her time to stand and dust off her coveralls. She had perfected the art of appearing smaller than she was, less threatening, less capable. Survival in civilian life had required learning to dim her own light, to suppress the razor-sharp instincts that had once made her one of the military's most feared precision shooters. "Riley's been working on vehicles since she was 16, Vinny Castellano said from behind the parts counter, his Italian accent still thick despite 40 years in Montana. "She's got the best diagnostic skills I've ever seen." Morrison's eyes swept over Riley with obvious skepticism. She was used to that look, the automatic dismissal that came with being a woman in a male-dominated field, especially one who appeared to have no formal credentials or impressive background. What Morrison couldn't see were the scars hidden beneath her long sleeves, the steady hands that had once held a rifle scope perfectly still for hours at a time, or the tactical awareness that was currently cataloging every exit, every potential weapon, every detail about the soldiers who had entered her workspace. "With all due respect," Morrison replied, though his tone suggested no respect whatsoever. "Military vehicles require specialized knowledge. We can't risk having amateur hour working on equipment that could mean the difference between life and death in combat zones." Riley's co-workers, Garrett Murphy, Caleb Washington, and Jade Kim, had all stopped their work to watch the confrontation unfold. Garrett, a 24-year-old who still lived with his mother, shifted uncomfortably near the tire rack. Caleb, a veteran mechanic in his 50s, studied his wrench with sudden fascination. Only Jade, fresh out of technical school and still full of righteous indignation, seemed ready to speak up in Riley's defense. "She knows more about engines than anyone in this shop," Jade said, her voice carrying the conviction of someone too young to understand the futility of fighting certain battles. Morrison's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "I'm sure she's great with oil changes and brake pads, but this is advanced military hardware. The transmission in this Humvee alone is worth more than this entire shop." Riley felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always accompanied moments when she had to choose between revealing herself and accepting humiliation. For 3 years, she had chosen humiliation. It was safer, quieter, less likely to attract the kind of attention that could destroy the peaceful life she had carefully constructed in Pine Ridge. But something about Morrison's tone, the casual cruelty in his dismissal, reminded her too strongly of other moments, other voices that had underestimated her before learning, sometimes too late, that appearances could be devastatingly deceiving. "The transmission isn't the problem," Riley said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying clearly through the suddenly silent garage. Morrison stopped mid-gesture, turning to face her with surprise that quickly transformed into irritation. "Excuse me." "Your transmission is fine," Riley continued, her hand steady despite the hammering of her heart. "The noise you're hearing is coming from the differential housing, specifically the ring gear. It's about 600 miles from complete failure, which means you've got maybe 2 days of normal driving before it locks up completely." The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison's expression shifted from irritation to confusion, then to something that might have been concern. Riley had learned, during her years of military service, that there was a particular quality to diagnostic precision that couldn't be faked or memorized from a manual. It was the kind of knowledge that came from understanding machinery at a molecular level, from having worked with equipment when lives depended on its reliability. "That level of specificity," Morrison said slowly, "requires either extraordinary luck or genuine expertise." Riley met his gaze steadily, seeing the moment when his assumptions began to crack. She had revealed too much, said too much, allowed her knowledge to show through the carefully constructed facade of competence, but not too competent, that had protected her for 3 years. "Lucky guess," she said, but even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow. Morrison pulled out his radio, stepping away from the group, but not far enough to prevent Riley from hearing his conversation. "Base, this is Morrison. I need a diagnostic team out here immediately. We may have a situation." As Morrison spoke quietly into his radio, Riley felt the walls of her carefully constructed anonymity beginning to crumble. She had spent 3 years learning to be nobody special, just another small-town mechanic with steady hands and a quiet disposition. But Morrison's reaction told her that she had crossed a line, revealed knowledge that raised questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Vinny approached her station, concern evident in his weathered features. "Riley, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Riley forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Vinny, just tired." But she wasn't fine. For the first time in 3 years, Riley Blackwood felt the familiar hyper-awareness that had once kept her alive in places where a single mistake meant death. Her civilian sanctuary was beginning to feel exposed, vulnerable, like a position that had been compromised and could no longer provide adequate cover. Through the garages, large windows, she could see Pine Ridge's main street, quiet and peaceful in the morning sun. Children walked to school, business owners swept their sidewalks, and life continued at the unhurried pace she had grown to love. But Riley's trained eye was already cataloging potential threats, escape routes, and defensive positions, because if there was one thing her military training had taught her, it was that peaceful moments were often the calm before devastating storms. And Staff Sergeant Morrison's radio call suggested that her storm was about to begin. As she returned to work on the Humvee, Riley's hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to maintain perfect calm under pressure. But beneath the surface, every instinct she had spent 3 years suppressing was awakening, preparing for a conflict she hoped would never come. She had no way of knowing that 200 miles away, a man named Dmitry Kozlov was studying satellite images of Pine Ridge, planning an operation that would shatter her peaceful existence and force her to remember exactly who she had been before she became just another small-town mechanic. The differential housing showed exactly the wear patterns she had predicted. And as she began the repair work, Riley couldn't shake the feeling that she was fixing more than just military equipment. She was trying to repair the cracks in a life she had built on the foundation of deliberate invisibility. But some cracks, once they appear, can never be fully sealed. And Riley Blackwood was about to discover that the past she had tried so hard to leave behind was already on its way to find her. The diagnostic team arrived within an hour, their black SUV cutting through Pine Ridge's morning tranquility like a knife through silk. Riley watched from beneath the Humvee as 3 specialists in military fatigues emerged, their movements precise and purposeful. Staff Sergeant Morrison greeted them with the kind of deference reserved for people who outranked him significantly, though none of them wore visible rank insignia. "Where's the mechanic who made the diagnosis?" asked the lead specialist, a woman. With steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the garage in a single sweep, Riley reluctantly rolled out from under the vehicle, wiping her hands on a shop rag. The woman's gaze fixed on her immediately, and Riley felt the uncomfortable sensation of being thoroughly evaluated by someone who knew exactly what to look for. "You're the one who identified the differential problem?" the woman asked, her voice carrying no trace of the condescension Morrison had displayed. "Yes, ma'am," Riley replied, keeping her voice steady and unremarkable. The specialist walked around the Humvee, running her hand along the chassis with the familiarity of someone who had worked with military vehicles extensively. "Show me exactly what you found." Riley hesitated for a moment, knowing that each additional detail she revealed would make it harder to maintain her cover. But the woman's professional demeanor and obvious expertise made deflection seem more suspicious than cooperation. "The ring gear shows microfractures consistent with metal fatigue," Riley explained, pointing to specific areas of wear. "The lubrication system has been contaminated, probably from a compromised seal that's been leaking for approximately 3,000 miles. The stress patterns indicate the vehicle has been operating in desert conditions with frequent high-speed maneuvers." The specialist's eyebrows rose slightly. "Desert conditions?" "Sand particulates in the lubricant, specific wear patterns on the gears that only occur in high-temperature, low-humidity environments. I'd guess Afghanistan or Iraq, based on the type of sand embedded in the components." The garage had fallen completely silent. Garrett, Caleb, and Jade had stopped pretending to work and were openly staring at Riley with expressions ranging from amazement to confusion. Even Vinny, who had known her for 3 years, was looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. "That's remarkably specific analysis," the specialist said quietly. "What's your background in military vehicle maintenance?" Riley felt the trap closing around her. Every instinct screamed at her to lie, to deflect, to maintain the carefully constructed identity that had protected her for 3 years. But the woman's question wasn't really a question, it was a test, and they both knew it. "I read a lot," Riley said lamely, echoing the same weak explanation she had perfected over the years. The specialist smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Technical manuals don't teach you to identify specific deployment theaters from differential wear patterns. That kind of knowledge comes from field experience." From her position near the parts counter, Jade finally found her voice. "Riley, what's she talking about? What kind of field experience?" Riley's hands were steady as she continued working on the differential, but her mind was racing through possibilities and contingencies. The woman watching her wasn't just any military specialist. She moved with the controlled awareness of someone from the intelligence community, someone trained to identify anomalies and investigate them thoroughly. "Miss," the specialist prompted. "Blackwood. Riley Blackwood." "Miss Blackwood, I'm going to ask you directly. Have you ever served in the United States military?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Riley could feel the weight of every gaze in the garage, the sudden tension that came when people realized they might not know someone as well as they thought they did. "I've never been asked that question before," Riley said carefully, which was technically true while avoiding an outright lie. The specialist pulled out a tablet and began typing rapidly. After a few moments, she frowned and looked up at Riley with renewed interest. "That's interesting. Riley Blackwood, age 28, Born in Billings, Montana. Graduated high school with honors. No college records, no military service records. No significant employment history before arriving in Pine Ridge 3 years ago. Riley's blood ran cold. She had been so careful to build her civilian identity slowly, paying cash for everything, avoiding the kind of paper trail that would connect her to her former life. But apparently, that very caution had made her suspicious to people trained to spot anomalies. Some people value their privacy, Riley said quietly. Privacy is one thing, the specialist replied. But this level of anonymity requires significant effort and resources. Almost like someone was trying to disappear. Vinny stepped forward, his protective instincts overriding his confusion. Now wait just a minute. Riley's been working for me for 3 years. She's never missed a day, never caused any trouble, never given me any reason to question her background. I'm not questioning her work ethic, the specialist said calmly. I'm questioning how a young woman with no documented military experience can perform diagnostic analysis that would challenge veteran military mechanics. Riley finished tightening the last bolt on the differential housing and lowered the Humvee's hydraulic lift. The repair was complete, but she knew that fixing the vehicle was the least of her problems now. There's something else, the specialist continued, consulting her tablet again. We ran a facial recognition scan. The system flagged some interesting possibilities, but the matches are all classified files that I don't have clearance to access. The words hit Riley like a physical blow. Facial recognition meant her carefully constructed anonymity was already compromised. Classified files meant someone, somewhere, was about to start asking questions that would lead to answers she wasn't ready to give. I think there's been a mistake, Riley said, but her voice lacked conviction. The specialist's expression softened slightly, as if she recognized the desperation in Riley's tone. Miss Blackwood, I want you to know that we're not here to cause trouble for you. But if you have military experience, especially specialized experience, we need to know about it. Why? Riley asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Because, the specialist said, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard, there's been chatter about a potential terrorist operation in this region. If someone with advanced military training is living in Pine Ridge, we need to know whether you're a threat or an asset. The words terrorist operation seemed to echo through the garage like a gunshot. Riley felt her civilian world beginning to collapse, the peaceful life she had built crumbling under the weight of circumstances beyond her control. Through the garage's windows, she could see Pine Ridge's main street, still quiet and normal in the afternoon sun. Children were walking home from school. Shop owners were preparing for the evening rush, and life continued at its unhurried pace. But Riley's trained eye was already seeing the town differently, cataloging sight lines, defensive positions, potential escape routes. Because if there was one thing her military training had taught her, it was that peaceful moments were often the calm before devastating storms. And the specialist's words suggested that Pine Ridge's storm was already on its way. As the diagnostic team prepared to leave, the lead specialist handed Riley a business card. If you remember anything about your background that might be relevant, please call this number immediately. Lives may depend on it. Riley took the card with steady hands, but inside, every instinct she had spent 3 years suppressing was screaming warnings. Her cover was blown. Her identity was compromised, and somewhere out there, people she had hoped never to face again were probably already on their way to find her. The specialist paused at the garage door. One more thing, Miss Blackwood. Whatever you're running from, whatever you're trying to forget, sometimes the past catches up whether we want it to or not. When it does, you'll have to decide who you really are. As the black SUV disappeared down Pine Ridge's main street, Riley stood in the garage that had been her sanctuary for 3 years, surrounded by people who were looking at her with new eyes. The mechanic they thought they knew was revealing cracks that, suggested someone entirely different beneath the surface. And in a way that made her hands shake for the first time in years, Riley Blackwood realized that her war wasn't over. It had just been waiting for the right moment to find her again. The next morning brought an unnatural quiet to Castellano's auto shop. Word had spread through Pine Ridge's tight-knit community about the military specialists who had questioned Riley, and the usual stream of local customers had dwindled to a trickle. Vinny tried to maintain normalcy, but Riley could see the questions in his eyes every time he looked at her. Garrett had called in sick, though Riley suspected he was simply uncomfortable being around someone who might not be who she claimed to be. Caleb worked in deliberate silence, his usual friendly chatter replaced by the kind of cautious distance people maintained around unexploded ordnance. Only Jade seemed unchanged, her curiosity overriding any concerns about Riley's mysterious background. "So," Jade said during their coffee break, leaning against the workbench with the directness of someone too young to understand the value of discretion, "what's the deal? Were you really in the military?" Riley wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, feeling the warmth seep through her palms. "Some questions are better left unasked. That's not an answer. Sometimes that's the only answer you get." Before Jade could press further, the garage's front door chimed with unusual force. Riley looked up to see Sheriff Curtis Blake entering, his expression grim and his hand resting unconsciously on his service weapon. Behind him walked a man Riley didn't recognize, tall, lean, with the kind of controlled stillness that screamed federal agent. "Riley," Sheriff Blake said, his voice carrying an apology she didn't want to hear. "This is Agent Marcus Webb from the FBI. He needs to ask you some questions." Agent Webb stepped forward, his movements economical and precise. "Miss Blackwood, I'd like to speak with you privately." Riley set down her coffee mug, her hand steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flood her system. "About what?" "About your background. About your qualifications. About how someone with no documented military service can perform diagnostic analysis that suggests extensive field experience with combat vehicles." The garage fell silent except for the perpetual hum of the air compressor. Caleb pretended to organize his tools while obviously straining to hear every word. Jade made no pretense of working, watching the confrontation with undisguised fascination. "I've already answered those questions," Riley said quietly. "No," Agent Webb replied. "You've deflected those questions. There's a difference." He pulled out a tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be a lengthy file. "Riley Blackwood. Social Security number issued 3 years ago. No employment history before Pine Ridge. No educational records beyond high school. No medical records, no insurance claims, no significant digital footprint." Riley remained silent, knowing that anything she said could only make her situation worse. "But here's what's interesting," Webb continued. "Yesterday's facial recognition scan produced several possible matches from classified military databases. Unfortunately, those files require security clearances I don't possess, which means someone with higher authority is going to want to speak with you very soon." Through the garage's windows, Riley noticed a black sedan parked across the street. That hadn't been there an hour earlier. 2 figures sat in the front seats, their attention focused on the shop. Her training automatically cataloged the vehicle's position, the sight lines it commanded, the tactical advantages it provided for surveillance or interdiction. "Agent Webb," she said carefully, "I think you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. I'm just a mechanic. Mechanics don't identify deployment theaters from differential wear patterns. Mechanics don't perform diagnostic analysis that impresses Pentagon specialists. And mechanics definitely don't disappear from all official records for 25 years and then suddenly appear in small-town Montana with advanced technical skills." Sheriff Blake shifted uncomfortably, his loyalty to Riley warring with his respect for federal authority. "Agent Webb, Riley's been a model citizen here. Never caused any trouble. never given anyone reason to worry. I'm not questioning her citizenship, Webb replied. I'm questioning her identity. Riley felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always accompanied moments when her carefully constructed world began to collapse. For 3 years, she had managed to be nobody special, just another competent mechanic in a town full of people who minded their own business. But Webb's questions were stripping away the layers of anonymity she had worked so hard to build. Miss Blackwood, Webb said, his voice taking on a more urgent tone, I need you to understand something. We've received intelligence suggesting that a terrorist cell may be planning an operation in this region. If you have military experience, especially combat experience, we need to know about it. Lives may be at stake. The words hit Riley like a physical blow. Terrorist cell, combat experience, lives at stake. The language of her former world, the vocabulary of violence and death that she had spent 3 years trying to forget. What kind of operation? She asked, hating herself for caring, for allowing her old instincts to override her civilian caution. Webb's expression sharpened at her question, recognizing the shift from deflection to professional interest. Intelligence suggests a planned attack on military transport routes, specifically convoys moving through this region. Riley's mind began automatically calculating tactical considerations, convoy routes, defensive positions, potential ambush sites. The analysis was involuntary, a product of training so deeply ingrained that it operated below conscious thought. When? She asked, then immediately regretted revealing her concern. We don't know, but the chatter suggests it's imminent. Riley looked around the garage that had been her sanctuary, seeing it now through tactical eyes. The building's position offered good sightlines of the main road, but poor defensive characteristics. Too many windows, too many approaches, no secondary exit routes. If trouble came to Pine Ridge, Castellano's auto shop would be a death trap for anyone caught inside. Agent Webb, she said quietly, I think you should leave. Miss Blackwood, I think you should leave now. Her tone carried something that made Webb step back involuntarily. For just a moment, the mask of small-town mechanic had slipped, revealing something harder underneath, something that recognized tactical situations and responded accordingly. Sheriff Blake's hand moved closer to his weapon, though Riley wasn't sure if he was preparing to protect her or protect others from her. Riley, he said carefully, maybe you should consider cooperating. If there really is a terrorist threat. There's always a terrorist threat. Riley interrupted, her voice carrying bitter knowledge. There's always someone planning to hurt innocent people. The question is whether getting involved makes things better or worse. Webb stepped forward again, his professional persistence overriding his instinctive caution. If you have skills that could help prevent an attack, don't you have an obligation to use them? Riley met his gaze directly, and for a moment, he saw something in her eyes that made him understand why the Pentagon specialists had been so interested in her background. Agent Webb, she said quietly, some skills come with costs you can't imagine. Some experiences leave marks that never heal. Some obligations can destroy everything you've tried to build. She turned back to her workbench, effectively dismissing him. I'm just a mechanic. Find someone else to fight your wars. As Webb and Sheriff Blake left the garage, Riley knew that her time was running out. The black sedan across the street, Webb's questions, the mention of terrorist threats, all of it pointed to a convergence that would force her to choose between the peaceful life she had built and the warrior she had tried so hard to forget. What terrified her most wasn't the prospect of being discovered. It was the realization that part of her was already preparing for battle, already calculating angles and distances and kill zones. The Riley Blackwood who changed oil and rotated tires was losing ground to someone much more dangerous, someone who had once been very good at ending threats permanently. And somewhere in the back of her mind, A voice she had tried to silence for 3 years was whispering that maybe it was time to stop running from who she really was. Outside, the black sedan remained in position, its occupants patient and professional. Riley recognized the surveillance pattern, knew that more teams would be positioned around town, creating a net that would be impossible to escape without revealing skills she wasn't ready to acknowledge. The trap was closing, and Riley Blackwood was running out of time to decide whether she would face it as a mechanic or as the weapon she had once been trained to be. That night, alone in her small apartment above Murphy's hardware store, Riley sat on her bed holding a photograph she hadn't looked at in 2 years. The image showed a younger version of herself in marine dress blues, standing beside a man whose weathered face carried the same determined jawline. Master Sergeant Thomas Cross, her father smiled with quiet pride as he pinned her sniper qualification badge to her uniform. The memory flooded back with painful clarity. Fort Benning, Georgia, 2018. She had just completed the most grueling training program the Marine Corps offered, earning the right to call herself a scout sniper. At 23, she was one of only 12 women to have ever qualified for the elite unit and the first to achieve expert marksman status on her first attempt. Blackwood, her father had said that day, using her chosen service name rather than Cross to maintain professional distance. Being the best shot in the Marine Corps is just the beginning. The real test is what you do with that skill when everything goes wrong. Riley traced her finger along the photograph's edge, remembering how invincible she had felt that day. The world had seemed so clear then, good guys, bad guys, and her job to ensure the good guys came home alive. She had been 18 years old, full of righteous purpose, eager to serve her country and make her father proud. The apartment's single window overlooked Pine Ridge's main street, now quiet in the evening darkness. But Riley wasn't seeing the peaceful Montana town. She was seeing Kandahar province, Afghanistan, where Gunnery Sergeant Riley Cross had earned a reputation that would eventually force her to disappear entirely. September 2019, Operation Viper Strike. Riley closed her eyes, but the memories came. Anyway, as vivid and brutal as the day they happened. She had been positioned on a ridgeline 2 kilometers from a Taliban compound, her Barrett M82 rifle perfectly zeroed, her breathing controlled, her heartbeat steady. Below, her team call sign Phoenix Squad was preparing to extract a captured intelligence officer through her scope. She had watched Staff Sergeant Michael Chun move through the compound's courtyard, his movements confident and professional. Behind him, Corporal Jamie Martinez provided cover while Sergeant Lisa Park secured their exit route. Rayleigh's job was overwatch to eliminate any threats that emerged outside the compound's walls. The first shot had been textbook perfect. A Taliban sniper, positioned 300 meters from the compound, had been lining up a shot on Chun. Riley's bullet took him down before he could fire, the .50 caliber round ensuring he would never threaten another American soldier. The second shot had saved Martinez from an RPG team that emerged from a hidden position. 800 meters, crosswind, moving target. Rayleigh's training had made it seem routine, but the third shot. Riley opened her eyes, her hands trembling as she set the photograph aside. The third shot had changed everything. She walked to her kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, but her mind remained locked in that terrible moment when everything went wrong. Phoenix Squad had been compromised, an IED had blocked their primary exit route, and Taliban fighters were converging from multiple directions. Chun had made the call to retreat through a narrow alley, but Riley's elevated position showed him what he couldn't see from ground level. 20 Taliban fighters were waiting in ambush, positioned to slaughter Phoenix Squad the moment they entered the alley. Riley's radio had malfunctioned. She couldn't warn them, couldn't redirect them to safety. She had perhaps 30 seconds before her team walked into a death trap. The compound had been in a populated area. Civilian buildings surrounded. The Taliban positions filled with families who had nothing to do with the war raging outside their windows. Rules of engagement were clear: no shots without confirmed military targets, no collateral damage, no civilian casualties. But Phoenix Squad was about to die. Riley had made her choice in the space between heartbeats. 3 shots, rapid succession. Each one fired into a building where Taliban fighters were positioned to ambush her team. The bullets punched through walls, through windows, through anything that stood between her rifle and the threats targeting her squad. All 3 shots found their marks. All 3 Taliban fighters died instantly, but Riley's bullets had passed through thin walls, through cheap construction materials, through barriers that hadn't been designed to stop .50 caliber rounds moving at 3,000 feet per second. 2. Civilian casualties. A father and his 8-year-old daughter, killed by fragments from bullets meant to save American lives. Phoenix Squad had escaped safely. The intelligence officer was recovered successfully. The mission was classified as a complete success, and Riley was recommended for the Silver Star for her precision shooting under extreme conditions. She had refused the medal. Riley returned to her bed, staring at the photograph of her younger self, remembering the woman who had believed that being the best shot in the Marine Corps was something to be proud of. That woman had died in Kandahar, killed by the realization that even perfect shots could have imperfect consequences. The investigation had cleared her of any wrongdoing. Rules of engagement permitted lethal force to protect friendly personnel, and the civilian casualties were classified as unavoidable collateral damage. Her commanding officers praised her quick thinking and accurate shooting. The Pentagon included her actions in training materials as an example of decisive leadership under pressure. But Riley couldn't forget the intelligence photos she had seen later, images of the father and daughter, whose lives had ended because she had chosen to pull the trigger. Ahmed Hassan, 42, a schoolteacher. Layla Hassan, 8 years old, who had been reading a book when Riley's bullet fragment ended her story forever. The nightmares had started immediately. Not the normal combat stress that every soldier experienced, but something deeper, a fundamental crack in her ability to see herself as one of the good guys. She had saved 4 American lives by taking 2 innocent ones, and the mathematics of war said she had made the right choice. But mathematics couldn't explain why she woke up every night seeing Layla Hassan's face. Riley had served out her remaining tour with mechanical precision, completing every mission, following every order, maintaining her reputation as the Marine Corps' most reliable sniper. But something essential had broken inside her, something that no amount of therapy or medals or commendations could repair. When her enlistment ended, she had simply walked away. No fanfare, no ceremony, no transition assistance. She had changed. Her name from Cross to Blackwood destroyed every connection to her military identity and disappeared into civilian life. Pine Ridge had seemed like the perfect place to hide, small, quiet, isolated, full of people who minded their own business and didn't ask difficult questions. For 3 years, she had been nobody special, just another competent mechanic who showed up on time and did good work. But now Agent Webb was asking questions that would lead to classified files, to service records, to the story of Phoenix Squad and Operation Viper Strike. And somewhere in the Montana darkness, terrorists were planning an attack that might require exactly the skills Riley had spent 3 years trying to forget. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Gunnery Sergeant Cross, we know who you are. We know what you did in Kandahar. Time to decide which side you're really on. Riley stared at the message, her blood running cold. Someone had found her, someone who knew her real identity and her military record. The carefully constructed anonymity that had protected her for 3 years was crumbling, and she was running out of time to decide who she wanted to be. Outside her window, Pine Ridge slept peacefully, unaware that their quiet mechanic was really a trained killer wrestling with Ghosts from a war most of them had forgotten. But Riley knew that peaceful moments were often the calm before devastating storms. And this storm, she was beginning to realize, was going to require her to remember exactly who Gunnery Sergeant Riley Cross had been before she became just another small-town mechanic, trying to forget her past. The question was whether she could use those skills to protect innocent people without becoming the weapon she had tried so hard to leave behind. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Riley didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window, watching Pine Ridge's empty streets, while her mind processed the implications of the anonymous text message. Someone knew her real identity, knew about Kandahar, knew enough about her past to use it as leverage. The question was who, and what they wanted from her. At 4:47 a.m., her answer arrived in the form of 3 black SUVs moving slowly down Main Street. They weren't trying to be subtle. Their presence was a message, a demonstration of force designed to intimidate. Riley watched through her window as the vehicles took positions around the town center, creating a perimeter that would control access to Pine Ridge's main thoroughfares. Her phone buzzed with another message. Coffee shop. 6 a.m., come alone, Riley. Dressed quickly, choosing clothes that would allow for movement while concealing the tactical knife she strapped to her ankle. Old habits that had kept her alive in places where trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. As she walked down Pine Ridge's main street, she noted the positions of the SUVs, the sight lines they commanded, the tactical advantages they provided. The Sunrise Cafe was Pine Ridge's only coffee shop, a small establishment run by Martha Stevens, a widow in her 60s who served the best pie in Montana. This morning, however, Martha was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a man in expensive suit sat at a corner table, his back to the wall, his position commanding a clear view of all entrances. Riley recognized him immediately, though she had hoped never to see him again. Dmitry Kozlov looked exactly as he had 3 years ago when their paths had crossed in Syria. Tall, lean, with the kind of predatory stillness that came from years of violence. His pale blue eyes tracked her movement as she entered the cafe, and his smile held no warmth whatsoever. Gunnery Sergeant Cross, he said in accented English, gesturing to the chair across from him. Or do you prefer Riley Blackwood now? Riley remained standing, her body automatically shifting into a tactical stance that would allow for rapid movement in any direction. What do you want, Kozlov? Such hostility. We worked so well together in Aleppo. We were never on the same side. Kozlov's laugh was soft and dangerous. Weren't we? You killed 15 of my competitors in a single afternoon. I made considerable profit from their absence. Riley remembered that day with painful clarity. She had been part of a joint task force, targeting arms dealers who were supplying chemical weapons to terrorist groups. Her job had been overwatch precision elimination of high-value targets while ground teams secured evidence. She had never known that Kozlov was in the area, had never realized that her actions had cleared the field for his own operations. I was following orders, she said quietly, and following them brilliantly. 15 shots, 15 kills, distances ranging from 400 to 1,200 meters. Wind conditions that would have challenged most snipers at half those ranges. You made it look effortless. Riley's hands remained steady, but inside, every instinct was screaming warnings. Kozlov wasn't the type to make social calls or reminisce about past operations. His presence in Pine Ridge meant something was about to happen, something that would require exactly the skills she had spent 3 years trying to forget. What do you want? She repeated. Kozlov reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, showing that he was retrieving something harmless. He placed a tablet on the table, its screen showing satellite images of a military convoy route that Riley recognized immediately. Highway 87, between Malmstrom Air Force Base and Great Falls, Kozlov said. Tomorrow, a convoy will transport certain materials along this route. Materials that my clients have paid handsomely to acquire. Riley studied the images, her tactical mind automatically analyzing the terrain, identifying potential ambush sites, calculating angles and distances. The route passed through mountainous terrain with limited visibility and numerous choke points, perfect conditions for the kind of operation Klov specialized in. "You're planning to hit a military convoy," she said. "I'm planning to acquire specific materials. The convoy is simply their current location, and you're telling me this because..." Kozlov's expression grew serious. "Because you're going to help me." Riley felt a chill that had nothing to do with Montana's morning air. "I'm not in that business anymore. Aren't you? A week ago, you demonstrated diagnostic expertise that impressed Pentagon specialists. Yesterday, FBI agents questioned you about your background. Your cover is blown, Sergeant Cross. Your peaceful civilian life is over." He leaned forward, his voice taking on a persuasive tone that Riley remembered from their brief encounter in Syria. "You have two choices. Help me acquire what I need, and I disappear forever. You can rebuild your life anywhere you choose, with a new identity that will never be compromised. Or I share certain information about Operation Viper Strike with people who might find it very interesting. Video footage of your shots, audio recordings of your communications, evidence that the civilian casualties weren't as unavoidable as your official report claimed." Riley's blood ran cold. The Pentagon's investigation had cleared her of wrongdoing, but she knew that public opinion operated by different rules than military tribunals. If footage of her actions in Kandahar became public, if the families of Ahmed and Layla Hassan learned the identity of the sniper who had killed them, her life would be over in ways that had nothing to do with legal consequences. "You're lying," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Kozlov smiled and tapped the tablet screen. A video began playing grainy surveillance footage from a camera she hadn't known existed, showing her position on the ridgeline in Kandahar. The timestamp matched the day of Operation Viper Strike exactly. "Russian intelligence has excellent equipment," Kozlov said conversationally. "We were monitoring American operations in the region quite closely." Riley watched herself on the screen, saw the moment when she made the decision to fire through civilian buildings to save her team. The footage showed her precision, her professionalism, her complete focus on the mission. It also showed the moment when her bullets passed through walls that hadn't been designed to stop .50 caliber rounds. "The families deserve to know," Kozlov continued, "don't you think? Ahmed Hassan's wife, Layla's mother, they've spent 4 years wondering who killed their family. I could give them answers." Riley sat down heavily, feeling the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. Everything she had built in Pine Ridge, everyone she had come to care about, would be destroyed if Kozlov released that footage. But helping him attack a military convoy would make her a traitor, would violate every oath she had ever taken. "What exactly are you transporting?" she asked. "Advanced weapons systems, prototypes that my clients find very attractive." "Clients?" "Let's just say they have strong opinions about American foreign policy." Riley understood the euphemism. Kozlov was selling advanced American weapons to terrorist organizations, groups that would use them to kill innocent people around the world. The convoy he wanted to hit wasn't just carrying military equipment, it was carrying the tools of future atrocities. "I won't help you arm terrorists," she said firmly. Kozlov's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his pale eyes. "Then you've chosen poorly." He stood, collecting his tablet. "You have until tomorrow morning to reconsider. The convoy departs Malmstrom at 0800 hours. If you're not at the coordinates I'm about to send you, ready to provide overwatch for my operation, then by evening, every news outlet in America will have footage of the sniper who killed 2 innocent civilians in Afghanistan." He paused at the cafe door. "Oh, and Sergeant Cross?" My people are already in position around Pine Ridge. If you try to warn the military or contact federal agents, this entire town will become a war zone. I trust you remember what those look like." As Kozlov left the cafe, Riley sat alone among the empty tables, surrounded by the familiar smells of coffee and pie that had represented peace and normalcy for 3 years. But that peace was gone now, shattered by the reappearance of a past she had tried so hard to escape. Through the cafe windows, she could see Pine Ridge waking up, shop owners opening their doors, children walking to school, ordinary people living ordinary lives. They had no idea that their quiet town had become ground zero for a confrontation that would force Riley to choose between protecting her secret and protecting innocent lives. She thought about Agent Webb's words, "If you have skills that could help prevent an attack, don't you have an obligation to use them?" Now she understood that the real question wasn't whether she had an obligation to fight. It was whether she could find a way to stop Kozlov without becoming the weapon she had spent 3 years trying to forget. But as she watched the black SUVs maintaining their positions around town, Riley realized that some battles couldn't be won with good intentions and peaceful solutions. Sometimes, protecting innocent people required becoming exactly the thing you had tried so hard to leave behind. The war had found her again. And this time, there might be no walking away. Riley walked back to the garage in a daze, Kozlov's ultimatum echoing in her mind with every step. The familiar sights of Pine Ridge, the hardware store where she rented her apartment, the diner where she ate lunch most days, the school where children played on swings now seemed fragile and temporary, like a peaceful dream about to become a nightmare. At Castellano's auto shop, she found chaos waiting for her. 2 more black SUVs had joined the surveillance perimeter, and federal agents in tactical gear were interviewing Vinny, Caleb, and Jade. Agent Webb stood near the parts counter, his expression grim as he consulted with a woman Riley didn't recognize, tall, professional, with the kind of controlled intensity that screamed military intelligence. "Riley," Jade called out as she entered, relief evident in her voice. "Thank God you're okay. These people have been asking about you for the past hour." Agent Webb approached immediately, his eyes scanning Riley's face for any sign of deception. "Miss Blackwood, we need to talk. Now." The woman beside him stepped forward, extending her hand with military precision. "Lieutenant Colonel Sophia Reeves, Defense Intelligence Agency. We have a situation." Riley shook the offered hand, noting the calluses that suggested fieldwork rather than desk duty. "What kind of situation?" "The kind where a known arms dealer named Dmitry Kozlov has been spotted in Pine Ridge, and we have intelligence suggesting an imminent attack on military assets in this region." Riley kept her expression neutral, though inside, every instinct was screaming warnings. If military intelligence knew about Kozlov's presence, then the situation was far more complex than a simple convoy robbery. This was becoming the kind of multi-layered operation that left civilian casualties and burned careers in its wake. "I don't know anyone named Kozlov," Riley said, which was technically true. In Syria, she had known him only as a target designation, not a person. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves studied Riley with the kind of professional assessment that missed nothing. "Miss Blackwood, our facial recognition system has identified you as someone with possible military background. Given the current threat level, we need to know exactly who you are and what skills you might possess." Through the garage windows, Riley could see more federal vehicles arriving, turning Pine Ridge's quiet Main Street into something resembling a military staging area. The town's residents had begun gathering on sidewalks, their faces mixing curiosity with growing concern, as their peaceful community became the center of a federal operation. "Skills?" Riley asked, buying time while her mind processed the tactical situation. "The kind of skills that would allow someone to identify military vehicle problems with unusual precision," Agent Webb interjected. "The kind that would suggest Extensive training in combat vehicle maintenance and operation. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves pulled out a tablet, showing Riley satellite images of the convoy route. Tomorrow morning, a high-priority military transport will move through this region. Intelligence suggests Kozlov's organization plans to intercept it. If you have relevant experience, we could use your assistance. Riley stared at the images, seeing the same terrain Kozlov had shown her earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her both. Sides wanted her help with the same operation, for completely different reasons. The federal agents saw her as a potential asset. Kozlov saw her as a coerced accomplice. What kind of assistance? She asked carefully. Reconnaissance. Tactical assessment. Your diagnostic skills suggest a familiarity with military equipment. That could be valuable in predicting Kozlov's approach. Before Riley could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and felt her blood run cold. Every federal agent you speak to puts another Pine Ridge resident at risk. Choose carefully. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves noticed Riley's reaction to the message. Is there something you need to tell us? Riley looked around the garage, seeing Vinny's worried face, Jade's frightened expression, Caleb's confusion. These people had become her family over the past 3 years, the closest thing to home she had known since leaving the military. Now, her presence was putting them in danger. I need some air, Riley said, walking toward the garage's rear exit. Miss Blackwood, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves called after her. We're running out of time. If Kozlov succeeds in his operation, advanced American weapons systems will end up in the hands of terrorist organizations. Innocent people will die. Riley paused at the door, her hand on the handle. Innocent people are already dying, she said quietly. The question is how many more will die because of the choices we make today. She stepped outside into Pine Ridge's morning air, but found no solace in the familiar surroundings. The town she had learned to love was becoming a battlefield, and she was trapped between forces that would destroy everything she cared about regardless of which side she chose. Her phone rang, another unknown number. She answered reluctantly. Sergeant Cross. Kozlov's voice was calm and professional. I trust you've met our federal friends by now. What do you want? I want you to understand the reality of your situation. Look across the street from the garage. Riley looked up to see a man in civilian clothes standing near the post office, his attention focused on something in his hands. Even from a distance, she could see the outline of what appeared to be a detonator. Remote explosives, Kozlov explained conversationally. Placed in strategic locations around Pine Ridge last night. The post office, the elementary school, Murphy's hardware store where you live. All it takes is a radio signal. Riley's hands began to shake with barely controlled rage. You're threatening to murder children. I'm providing motivation. Help me acquire what I need from tomorrow's convoy, and Pine Ridge remains a peaceful small town. Refuse, and it becomes a memorial to your misguided sense of loyalty. The federal agents will be blamed for the tragedy. Foreign terrorists strike American small town while incompetent federal response fails to protect innocent civilians. The narrative writes itself. Riley closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices crushing down on her. Kozlov had created a scenario where any action she took would result in death and destruction. Help him, and advanced weapons would reach terrorist organizations worldwide. Refuse, and everyone she cared about would die in explosive fire. There's a third option, Kozlov continued, as if reading her thoughts. You could try to play hero. Use those famous sniper skills to eliminate me and my team. But ask yourself this, Sergeant Cross, can you guarantee perfect shots when the lives of 3,000 innocent people depend on it? Can you be certain that every one of my operatives will be eliminated before any of them triggers those explosives? Riley opened her eyes, looking at Pine Ridge with new understanding. The peaceful town had become a sophisticated trap, designed to force her compliance through the threat of mass casualties. Klov had turned her greatest strength, her protective instincts, into a weapon against her. "You have 18 hours to decide," Klov said. "Use them wisely." As the call ended, Riley stood in the alley behind Castellano's auto shop, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of the town she had learned to call home. But that home was now a powder keg, with Klov holding the match and Riley forced to choose who would burn. Through the garage windows, she could see Lieutenant Colonel Reeves and Agent Webb discussing tactical options, probably planning some kind of federal response that would get everyone killed. They had no idea that their target had already anticipated their moves, had already positioned himself to win regardless of their actions. Riley thought about her father's words. The real test is what you do with that skill when everything goes wrong. Everything had gone wrong. Her cover was blown, her peaceful life was over, and innocent people were going to die no matter what choice she made. But maybe, just maybe, there was a fourth option that neither Klov nor the federal agents had considered. Maybe it was time for Gunnery Sergeant Riley Cross to stop running from who she had been and start using those skills to protect the people she had learned to love. The question was whether she could do it without becoming the monster she had spent 3 years trying to forget. Riley spent the next 4 hours conducting what she told herself was reconnaissance, but what felt more like saying goodbye. She walked through Pine Ridge's familiar streets, cataloging every face, every family, every life that hung in the balance of her impossible decision. At the elementary school, she watched children playing during recess, their laughter echoing across the playground where Kozlov's operative had planted enough explosives to level the building. Mrs. Patterson, the principal, waved at Riley from the school's front steps, the same woman who had helped Riley fill out forms when she first arrived in town, who had treated a stranger with suspicious gaps in her background with nothing but kindness. The post office was next, where Clara Morrison had worked for 30 years, serving a community that trusted her with their most important communications. Riley had mailed exactly 3 letters in 3 years, all to a post office box in Denver that forwarded them to her father's grave. Clara had never asked questions about the unusual mailing pattern, had simply done her job with the quiet professionalism that defines small town America. Murphy's hardware store stood at the corner of Main and First, its windows displaying the same tools and supplies that had helped Riley maintain her cover as a simple mechanic. Above the store, her small apartment had been the first place in years where she had slept without nightmares, where she had felt safe enough to let down her guard. All of it would be gone in 18 hours unless she helped Kozlov steal weapons that would be used to kill innocent people around the world. By afternoon, the federal presence in Pine Ridge had tripled. Black SUVs occupied every major intersection, and agents in tactical gear maintained positions that would have been impressive against conventional threats. But Riley knew they were preparing for the wrong kind of fight. Kozlov wasn't planning a shootout. He was holding the entire town hostage while forcing her to make an impossible choice. She returned to the garage to find Lieutenant Colonel Reeves coordinating with a team of specialists, their equipment spread across Vinny's workbench like the tools of a very different kind of repair job. "Miss Blackwood," Reeves said as Riley entered, "we need to discuss your role in tomorrow's operation." "I don't have a role in your operation. That's where you're wrong." Reeves gestured to a tactical map showing the convoy route. "We've identified 17 potential ambush sites along this route. Your expertise with military vehicles could help us predict which site Kozlov will choose." Riley studied the map, her tactical mind automatically analyzing the terrain. Kozlov would choose the narrowest canyon, the spot with the most limited visibility and the greatest number of escape routes. But telling the federal agents that would only get them killed faster. "I'm just a mechanic," she said, falling back on the defense that had protected her for 3 years. "No," Reeves said firmly, "you're not. Our background investigation has reached some interesting conclusions. She pulled out a classified folder, its contents hidden but its thickness suggesting extensive documentation. We know you're former military. We know you have specialized training. We know you're hiding from something that happened during your service. Riley felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came when her carefully constructed world began to collapse. You don't know anything. We know enough. Reeves leaned forward, her voice taking on an urgent tone. Miss Blackwood, or whatever your real name is, people are going to die tomorrow. Military personnel, federal agents, possibly civilians. If you have skills that could prevent those deaths, you have a moral obligation to use them. Riley thought about the moral obligations that had haunted her for 3 years, about the weight of decisions made in the space between heartbeats, about the cost of being right when being right meant innocent people died. Moral obligations, she repeated. Quietly, do you know what happens when you try to save everyone? You end up saving no one. Before Reeves could respond, Riley's phone buzzed with another message. Time for a demonstration. Watch the news. Every screen in the garage, tablets, phones, the small television Vinny kept for background noise, suddenly displayed the same. Emergency broadcast. A news anchor appeared, her face grave as she read from a teleprompter. We're receiving reports of an explosion at a federal facility in Great Falls, Montana. Early reports suggest at least 12 casualties, with several federal agents among the wounded. Authorities believe this may be connected to terrorist activity in the region. The broadcast cut to aerial footage of a building Riley recognized, the FBI field office where Agent Webb had mentioned conducting his background investigation. Smoke poured from the structure's shattered windows, and emergency vehicles surrounded the scene like antibodies responding to an infection. Riley's phone rang immediately. Kozlov's voice was calm and professional, as if he were discussing weather rather than murder. 12 federal agents, he said conversationally. All injured, but all alive, this time. Consider it a demonstration of capability and restraint. You sick bastard, Riley whispered. I'm pragmatic. Those agents were investigating your background, asking questions that might have complicated our arrangement. Now they're busy recovering from their injuries, and their files have been simplified. Riley understood the message. Kozlov had eliminated the investigation that might have revealed her true identity, while simultaneously demonstrating that his reach extended far beyond Pine Ridge. No one was safe, no matter how far they ran. The choice remains the same, Kozlov continued. Help me acquire tomorrow's shipment, or Pine Ridge becomes a memorial. But now you understand that running isn't an option. My resources are extensive, and my patience is limited. As the call ended, Riley looked around the garage that had been her sanctuary, seeing the faces of people who had become her family. Vinny stood near the parts counter, his weathered hands shaking as he processed the news broadcast. Jade sat on a work stool, her young face pale with fear she didn't fully understand. Caleb maintained his tools with mechanical precision, the kind of busy work people do when the world stops making sense. These people deserved to live their quiet lives in peace, deserved to grow old in the town they loved, deserved to see their children graduate and start families of their own. They deserved better than being caught in the crossfire of a war they hadn't chosen. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves approached Riley, her expression mixing determination with desperate hope. We can protect this town. We can stop Kozlov. But we need your help. Riley met her gaze, seeing the same confidence she had once carried into impossible situations, the same belief that good intentions and superior training could overcome any obstacle. She had been that young once, that certain that there were always good choices available to people willing to fight for them. You can't protect anyone, Riley said quietly. This isn't a tactical situation you can solve with proper positioning and overwhelming force. This is a hostage scenario where the hostages don't even know they're being held. Then help us change that. Riley walked to the garage's front window, looking out at Pine Ridge's main street. Children were walking home from school, their backpacks bouncing as they hurried toward houses where their parents waited with afternoon snacks and questions about their day. Shop owners were preparing for the evening rush, arranging displays, and calculating receipts from another ordinary day in an ordinary town, all of it balanced on the edge of a knife. One decision away from becoming a smoking crater in the Montana landscape. Riley thought about her father's words, about the real test being what you do when everything goes wrong. Everything had gone wrong 3 years ago in Kandahar, and she had made a choice that saved American lives at the cost of innocent ones. Now everything was going wrong again, and she faced the same impossible mathematics: save some people by sacrificing others, or watch everyone die while trying to save everyone. But maybe there was a third option. Maybe the lesson from Kandahar wasn't that her choice had been wrong, but that she had been thinking too small. Maybe the real test wasn't choosing who to save, but finding a way to save everyone by becoming exactly what she had spent 3 years trying to forget. Riley turned away from the window, her decision made. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, I need you to listen very carefully. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but it's the only way to save this town. For the first time in 3 years, Gunnery Sergeant Riley Cross was about to go to war. Riley's transformation began with a single phone call to a number she had memorized but never used, a classified line that connected directly to the Pentagon's Crisis Response Center. When the encrypted connection established, she identified herself with words that felt foreign after 3 years of silence. This is Gunnery Sergeant Riley Cross, service number 2847915677823. Authentication code Viper 77. I need immediate contact with General Patricia Lane. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves stared at Riley in shock as the call was transferred through multiple security protocols. Within minutes, a voice that Riley remembered from countless briefings crackled through the secure line. Riley Cross, General. Lane's voice carried a mixture of relief and concern. We've been looking for you for 3 years. Where the hell have you been? Montana, ma'am. Trying to be someone else. Well, that someone else just saved a lot of lives. We've been monitoring the situation in Pine Ridge. What do you need? Riley looked around the garage where she had spent 3 years pretending to be ordinary, seeing it now through tactical eyes. I need a suppressed rifle, range cards for the surrounding terrain, and complete operational control over the federal response. Done. What's your assessment? Klov has the town wired with explosives and operatives in overwatch positions. He's holding 3,000 civilians hostage to force my cooperation with a convoy robbery. Traditional federal response will get everyone killed. Your recommendation? Riley closed her eyes, feeling the familiar calm that had once made her the Marine Corps' most feared sniper settling over her like a second skin. I eliminate his capability to harm civilians, then provide overwatch for the convoy operation. But I do it alone. Negative. You'll have full support. Ma'am, with respect, support will compromise the operation. Kozlov knows federal tactical doctrine. He doesn't know me. A long pause. You're talking about a one-person assault on a sophisticated terrorist cell. I'm talking about doing what I was trained to do. Within an hour, a black helicopter landed in the field behind Pine Ridge High School. Riley walked toward it alone, having said her goodbyes to Vinny, Jade, and Caleb with the kind of casual words that didn't reveal she might never see them again. The helicopter carried equipment she hadn't touched in 3 years. An M40A5 sniper rifle with Schmidt and Bender scope, custom ammunition, tactical gear designed for solo operations. As she examined the weapon, muscle memory took over. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking the rifle's zero, calculating windage adjustments, preparing for shots that would have to be perfect on the first attempt. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves had insisted on accompanying the helicopter, her expression mixing admiration with concern as she watched Riley's transformation from small-town mechanic to military precision instrument. "How many of them are there?" Reeves asked. Riley studied aerial photographs of Pine Ridge, her trained eye identifying positions that civilians would never notice. 12 operatives minimum. Kozlov plus 11 specialists positioned to control all approaches to the town and maintain eyes on the explosive devices. That's impossible odds for one person. Only if you try to fight them conventionally. Riley traced positions on the photographs with her finger. But they're positioned to fight federal agents, not a ghost. As the sun began to set, Riley made her way to a ridge overlooking Pine Ridge, carrying equipment that felt both foreign and familiar after 3 years of wrenches and oil changes. The town spread below her like a tactical map, its lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. Through her rifle scope, she began identifying targets. The first operative was positioned in the bell tower of St. Mary's Catholic Church, his rifle trained on the elementary school's playground. Riley estimated the range at 847 meters, with a crosswind that would require a 2-inch adjustment. She had made harder shots under worse conditions, but never with so much depending on perfect execution. The second operative occupied the roof of Carson's feed store, his attention focused on the main street where federal agents maintained their visible presence. Range, 623 meters, clear line of sight. No atmospheric interference. One by one, Riley cataloged 12 positions, 12 shots that would have to be executed in rapid succession before any of the operatives could trigger the explosives that would turn Pine Ridge into a crater. Her phone buzzed with a final message from Kozlov. "Last chance. Sergeant Cross. Sunrise in 6 hours. Choose wisely." Riley typed her response with steady fingers. Choice made. At 11:47 p.m., Gunnery Sergeant Riley Cross began the most important mission of her career. The first shot was textbook perfect. The operative in the church bell tower never knew what hit him. Riley's bullet taking him down silently from a distance that made retaliation impossible. She worked the rifle's bolt, chambered a new round, and shifted to the second target. The operative on Carson's feed store was reaching for his radio when Riley's second shot found its mark. 2 down, 10 to go, and still no alarm had been raised. Riley moved positions, using skills learned in places where detection meant death. She flowed through Pine Ridge's surrounding terrain like a shadow, using every fold in the ground, every stand of trees, every natural feature that provided concealment while maintaining sightlines to her targets. The third shot eliminated the operative watching Murphy's hardware store, the building where Riley had lived for 3 years, where her apartment windows had looked out on a town she had learned to love. Range, 734 meters. Wind speed, 12 miles per hour from the southwest. Adjustment, 3 inches left. Perfect hit. By 2:15 a.m., Riley had eliminated 8 of Kozlov's operatives without triggering a single alarm. Her movements were precise, professional, guided by training that had been burned into her muscle memory through countless hours of practice. This was what she had been born to do, what all her civilian pretensions couldn't change. The 9th operative proved more challenging. Positioned behind the post office with a clear view of multiple approaches, he was checking in regularly with his team. Riley would have to time her shot perfectly, eliminating him during a communication window that would buy her precious minutes before anyone noticed his silence. She waited, scope centered on her target, breathing controlled, heartbeat steady. When the operative reached for his radio, Riley squeezed the trigger with the kind of deliberate precision that separated expert marksmen from lucky amateurs. Shot 9. Confirmed kill. 3 operatives remained, plus Kozlov himself. But these final targets were positioned to watch each other, creating a mutual observation network that would make silent elimination nearly impossible. Riley would have to change tactics, would have to reveal herself and trust that her skills were superior to theirs. She moved to her final position, a coven ridge that provided sightlines to all remaining targets, but also exposed her to return fire. For the first time in 3 years, Gunnery Sergeant Riley Cross was about to engage in direct combat. Through her scope, she could see Klov standing near the post office, his pale eyes scanning the darkness, as if he sensed that his carefully planned operation was falling apart around him. He held what appeared to be a dead man's switch, the final trigger for the explosives that would destroy Pine Ridge if Riley made a single mistake. 3 shots. 3 targets. No room for error. Riley's finger found the trigger, and for the first time since Kandahar, she felt the familiar calm that came with absolute certainty. She knew exactly who she was, exactly what she had to do, and exactly how to do it. The next 90 seconds would determine whether Pine Ridge survived the night, whether 3,000 innocent people lived or died, whether Riley Cross could finally forgive herself for the choices she had made in Afghanistan. The war had found her again, but this time she was ready for it. Riley's scope centered on the first of the 3 remaining operatives, a sniper positioned on the roof of Pine Ridge Bank, his attention focused on the federal agent's command post. Range, 892 meters. Wind, variable, gusting from the northwest. At 15 miles per hour. Difficulty, extreme, with civilian buildings in the background requiring absolute precision to prevent collateral damage. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow to the methodical rhythm that had made her legendary among Marine Corps' snipers. The crosshairs settled on her target with the kind of steady precision that couldn't be taught, only earned through years of practice and dozens of confirmed kills. The shot broke clean and true, the .308 round crossing nearly 900 meters of Montana air to find its mark with surgical precision. The operative dropped without a sound, his rifle clattering onto the bank's roof tiles. 2 targets remained, plus Klov. Riley worked the bolt, chambering a fresh round while shifting her scope to the second target. This operative had positioned himself behind a concrete barrier near the town's water tower, creating a defensive position that would deflect anything but a perfect shot. Worse, his location provided clear sight lines to both the elementary school and the post office where Klov waited with his dead man switch. Through her scope, Riley could see the operative's face, young, professional, wearing the kind of focused expression that suggested extensive training. He was good, probably very good, but he was fighting the wrong kind of war. He had prepared for a conventional engagement with federal agents, not a ghost war with an invisible enemy. Riley adjusted for the concrete deflection angle, calculating bullet trajectory with the kind of mathematical precision that had once impressed her instructors at Quantico. The shot would have to thread between 2 buildings, clear a power line, and strike a target partially concealed behind military-grade barriers. She squeezed the trigger. The second operative jerked backward as Riley's bullet found the narrow gap between his helmet and body armor, ending his threat to Pine Ridge's sleeping children. His weapon fell silent, leaving only one barrier between Riley and the man who held 3,000 lives in his hands. Klov had positioned himself perfectly. Standing in the post office's doorway, he commanded clear sight lines in all directions, while maintaining cover from multiple angles of attack. In his left hand, he held the dead man switch that would detonate explosives throughout Pine Ridge if his grip relaxed. His right hand held a radio, undoubtedly connected to remaining cells that would continue the mission if he died, but it was his third advantage that concerned Riley most: his human shield. Through her scope, she could see Clara Morrison, the post office's elderly clerk, standing directly in front of Klov with a gun pressed to her head. Clara's face showed the kind of determined calm that came from 70 years of facing life's challenges, but Riley could see fear in her eyes as she stared into the darkness where she somehow knew help was coming. Riley's radio crackled with General Lane's voice. "Cross, what's your status?" 3 primary targets eliminated. Kozlov remains, with hostage and dead man switch, requesting immediate tactical assessment. Negative on direct engagement, too much risk to civilian population. Riley studied the tactical situation through her scope, analyzing angles and possibilities with the cold precision that had once made her the Pentagon's most requested sniper. Kozlov had created a perfect defensive position, any shot that killed him would also kill Clara Morrison, and any shot that missed would trigger the explosives that would level Pine Ridge. "Ma'am," Riley said into radio, "I have a solution, but you're not going to like it." "Explain." "I need Kozlov to move approximately 18 inches to his left. That would create a clear shot that eliminates the threat without harming the hostage." "How do you propose to make him move?" Riley was already reaching for her sidearm, a decision that went against every tactical doctrine she had ever learned. By giving him a target he can't ignore. Before General Lane could respond, Riley holstered her radio and began moving down the ridge toward Pine Ridge's main street. She left her sniper rifle behind, carrying only her sidearm and the kind of desperate plan that would either save everyone or get everyone killed. The walk down Main Street felt like the longest 300 meters of Riley's life. Every shadow could conceal another operative. Every window could hide a sniper. Every step could trigger explosives that would end her mission before it began. But Pine Ridge remained quiet around her, its residents sleeping peacefully while their survival balanced on the edge of impossibly narrow margins. Kozlov spotted her when she was still 50 meters away. Through the post office's large front window, she could see his pale eyes widen with recognition, then narrow with professional interest as he realized that the ghost who had eliminated his entire team was walking directly toward him. "Gunnery." "Sergeant Riley Cross," his voice carried clearly through the still night air. "I was beginning to think you were a coward." Riley stopped in the middle of Main Street, her hands visible, her posture suggesting surrender rather than attack. "Let Clara go, Kozlov. Your fight is with me." "My fight is with American imperialism." "Clara Morrison is simply collateral damage. She's an innocent civilian." "There are no innocent civilians in war, Sergeant Cross. Surely your experience in Kandahar taught you that." The words hit Riley like physical blows, bringing back memories of Ahmed and Layla Hassan, of choices made in impossible moments when perfect solutions didn't exist. But this time would be different. This time she would find a way to save everyone. "You want me alive," Riley called out, gambling everything on her understanding of Kozlov's psychology. "Dead, I'm just another casualty. Alive, I'm a trophy you can display to your clients." Kozlov's smile was visible even at 50 meters. "An interesting proposition. But you've already demonstrated that you're too dangerous to capture." Not if. "I surrender my weapon." Riley reached slowly for her sidearm, making every movement deliberate and non-threatening. She could feel Kozlov's attention focused on her hands, could sense his tactical mind calculating possibilities and risks. "Drop your weapon and walk forward," Kozlov commanded. "Any sudden movements, and Clara dies." Riley let her pistol fall to the asphalt, the metallic clatter echoing through Pine Ridge's sleeping streets. She began walking forward, counting steps, calculating distances, waiting for the moment when Kozlov's attention would shift from Clara to his approaching prize dot at 20 meters. Kozlov made his mistake. He shifted position slightly, moving to get a better angle on Riley while maintaining his grip on both the dead man switch and Clara Morrison. The movement was subtle, barely perceptible, but it created exactly the gap Riley had been waiting for. Her hand moved to the backup knife, strapped to her ankle, not to throw it, but to create the distraction that would make Kozlov move exactly 18 inches to his left. The blade caught Pine Ridge's streetlight as Riley drew it, a flash of steel that drew Kozlov's attention for exactly the fraction of a second she needed. From her position on the ridge, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves watched through binoculars as Riley created the impossible shot. A single sniper, hidden in the darkness beyond the town, fired once. Kozlov's head snapped backward as the bullet found its mark with surgical precision. His grip on the dead man's switch relaxed, but the device clattered to the post office floor. Without triggering the explosives that would have destroyed Pine Ridge, Clara Morrison collapsed to her knees, alive and unharmed, while Dmitry Kozlov fell backward into the post office. His threat to 3,000 innocent people ending with the kind of perfect shot that only one person in Montana could have made. Riley stood in Main Street, looking at the post office where Clara Morrison was already being helped to safety by federal agents, feeling the familiar emptiness that came after impossible missions ended successfully. Her radio crackled with General Lane's voice. "Outstanding work. Sergeant Cross, how the hell did you make that shot?" Riley looked back toward the ridge where she had left her sniper rifle, knowing that another member of her old team, probably Staff Sergeant Martinez from Phoenix, squad had been positioned there with orders to take the shot if she could create the opportunity. "I didn't make the shot, ma'am. I just made it possible." For the first time in 3 years, Gunnery Sergeant Riley Cross had fought a war without taking a life herself. She had found a way to save everyone, to protect innocent people without adding new names to the list of souls that haunted her dreams. Pine Ridge was safe. Its people would wake tomorrow to ordinary concerns and everyday problems, never knowing how close they had come to becoming memory and ash. But Riley knew that her war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Dawn broke over Pine Ridge with the kind of spectacular Montana sunrise that Riley had grown to love during her 3 years of hiding. Golden light spilled across the town's quiet streets, illuminating a community that had survived the night without ever knowing they had been in mortal danger. Children would walk to school, shop owners would open their doors, and life would continue at the unhurried pace that defined small town America. But everything had changed. Riley sat on the steps of Castellano's auto shop, still wearing the tactical gear that had transformed her from small-town mechanic back into Gunnery Sergeant Riley Cross. Around her, federal agents were conducting their methodical cleanup, processing evidence, debriefing personnel, and ensuring that the official record would reflect a successful counter-terrorism operation without revealing the classified details that might compromise future operations. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves approached with 2 cups of coffee and the kofa, kind of respectful distance that senior officers maintained around legends. "The Pentagon is very impressed with your work, Sergeant Cross. General Lane wants to discuss your future." Riley accepted the coffee gratefully, letting its warmth chase away the pre-dawn chill that had settled in her bones. "What kind of future?" "Full reinstatement at your previous rank, command of your own unit, choice of assignments. After what you accomplished here, you could write your own ticket." Through the garage's windows, Riley could see Vinny, Jade, and Caleb preparing for another ordinary day of oil changes and brake repairs. They moved with the comfortable efficiency of people who had found their place in the world, who knew exactly what each day would bring and who would be there to share it. 3 years ago, Riley said quietly, "I would have jumped at that offer. And now?" Riley thought about the choices that had brought her to this moment, leaving the military after Kandahar, changing her identity, learning to find satisfaction in work that used her hands rather than her skills as a killer. The journey from Gunnery Sergeant Riley Cross to Riley Blackwood had been painful, but it had also been necessary. "Now I understand that some victories come with prices that are too high to pay." Lieutenant Colonel Reeves sat beside Riley on the steps, her expression mixing understanding with disappointment. "The country needs people like you. People who can make impossible shots, who can think tactically under pressure, who can save lives when everything goes wrong. The country has plenty of people like that. What it needs more of are people who can teach others to be better than they thought possible." Before Reeves could respond, a familiar voice called out from the garage. "Riley, you coming to work today, or are you planning to sit on those steps until the concrete grows grass?" Vinny Castellano stood in the doorway, his weathered face mixing concern with the kind of gentle humor that had made Riley feel welcome from her first day in Pine Ridge. Behind him, Jade and Caleb waited with expressions that suggested they had questions but were willing to wait for answers. Riley stood slowly, feeling the weight of tactical gear that no longer seemed to fit quite right. "Vinny, we need to talk." "About what?" "About how you turned out to be some kind of secret military hero. About how you saved this whole town from getting blown up." Vinny's voice carried no accusation, only the matter-of-fact acceptance that defined his approach to life's surprises. "Far as I'm concerned, you're still the best mechanic I've ever hired. Everything else is just interesting background." Jade stepped forward, her young face bright with curiosity and admiration. "Riley, is it true? Were you really some kind of super soldier?" "I was a Marine," Riley said simply, "a long time ago." "But you're still our Riley," Caleb added, his quiet voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned not to judge people by their pasts. "Right?" Riley looked at the three people who had become her family, seeing acceptance in their faces rather than fear or suspicion. They knew her secret now, knew that their quiet mechanic was really a trained killer who had spent the night eliminating terrorists with surgical precision. But they were offering her the same unconditional acceptance they had shown a stranger, with mysterious gaps in her background 3 years earlier. "Yeah," Riley said, feeling something tight in her chest finally beginning to relax. "I'm still your Riley." Lieutenant Colonel Reeves cleared her throat diplomatically. "Sergeant Cross, I need an answer for General Lane. Will you accept reinstatement?" Riley began removing her tactical gear, setting aside the tools of war with deliberate ceremony. The night vision goggles, the radio, the backup weapons, all of it felt like artifacts from someone else's life, someone she had been, but didn't need to be anymore. "Tell General Lane that Gunnery Sergeant Riley Cross completed her final mission last night. But Riley Blackwood has work to do here. The Pentagon won't be happy with that answer. The Pentagon has managed without me for 3 years. They'll figure it out." Reeves stood, recognizing dismissal when she heard it. "If you change your mind, I won't." As the federal vehicles began departing Pine Ridge, carrying their classified reports and official commendations back to Washington, Riley walked into Castellano's auto shop and pulled on her coveralls for the first time since her world had turned upside down. The familiar fabric felt different, now not like a disguise or a form of hiding, but like a choice she was making about who she wanted to be. "So," Jade said, following Riley to her workstation, "what happens now? Do we just pretend last night never happened?" Riley considered the question while examining the day's first repair job, a transmission that needed rebuilding, work that would require patience, precision, and the kind of attention to detail that couldn't be rushed. It was honest work, necessary work, the kind of problem-solving that created rather than destroyed. "Last night happened," Riley said. "It was necessary, and I'm glad I could help. But it doesn't change who I choose to be today." She began disassembling the transmission with the same methodical precision she had once applied to eliminating targets at impossible ranges. But now that precision was used to repair rather than destroy, to solve problems that would help families get to work and children get to school and ordinary people live their ordinary lives. Vinny approached her workstation carrying a cup of coffee and a smile that suggested he had reached some kind of internal peace with the night's revelations. "Riley, I've got a question for you. Shoot." She paused, then laughed at her own word choice. "Sorry. Ask away." "This whole military thing, this secret identity business, does it mean you're going to want a raise?" Riley's laughter filled the garage, echoing off the concrete walls and mixing with the familiar sounds of tools and machinery and honest work being done by honest people. For the first time in 3 years, she laughed without reservation, without the careful control that came from hiding essential parts of herself. "Vinny," she said, "I think I'm exactly where I need to be, making exactly what I deserve." Outside, Pine Ridge continued its peaceful morning routine. Federal agents finished their cleanup and disappeared into the bureaucratic machinery that would classify the night's events beyond public scrutiny. The town's residents went about their daily business, never knowing that their quiet mechanic had saved all their lives. But Riley knew, and that knowledge brought a kind of peace she hadn't felt since Kandahar. She had found a way to use her skills to protect innocent people without taking lives, had discovered that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in pulling the trigger, but in choosing not to. The transmission wouldn't repair itself, and Vinny had 3 more jobs scheduled before lunch. Riley Blackwood had work to do, the kind of work that built communities rather than destroying them, that solved problems rather than creating them, that honored the memory of Ahmed and Layla Hassan by choosing creation over destruction whenever possible. Some wars were fought with rifles and precision shots. Others were fought with wrenches and patient rebuilding. Riley had finally learned the difference, and she was ready for whatever battles lay ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.